Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Sampson, and I will be doing the study Sunday of today. It's going to be A Terror in the Heart of Freedom by Hannah Rosen, who's a really good author. Hi, everyone. My name is Monique Sampson, and I will be doing the study Sunday. I'm wearing Fred Hampton earrings today. Everybody should get one. I got them from this Black-owned Etsy shop that is really, really awesome. So I hope your Sundays are going very well. We're going to talk about this book in different parts. So first, we're going to be talking about gendered terms and how they use them back to suppress people's movements. Then we're going to be talking about Frances Thompson, Hannah Rosen, who's a really basically stared in the face of evil and testified against her accusers. We're going to be talking about how Jacksonville, which is the city that I'm from, became a safe haven for newly emancipated slaves and freed people that were escaping brutality. And then we're also going to be talking about how people fought back, specifically women, in the face of evil. So I will start off by reading a few excerpts. I'll start off with one. All right, so this is straight from the book, okay? So women were also prominent among those free people in Memphis who used the power of the federal government to secure their personal safety and livelihood in the city. Acting as citizens, freed women pressed charges against white Memphis, that's a hard word to say, and the Freedmen's Bureau Court to claim unpaid wages and protest violent assaults. The impact of legal action at times spilled over from the courts into the streets when whites resisted verdicts and clashes with soldiers, making arrests, collecting fines, and confiscating property. Even when cases did not lead to conviction, freed women's actions brought charges of white abuse against Blacks in the public eye. So there was this thing called slavery, and after slavery ended in the Postemancipation South, there was a thing called white backlash. So what essentially happened was a riot and a massacre where a bunch of basically people that belong to the white elite class in the South went around raping women, assaulting men, specifically freed men and freed women in the South. This led to the U.S. Attorney's Office getting involved and basically looking over these charges and hundreds of people testifying against these daily abuses. So let me read you a story or tell you a story about a woman named Frances Thompson. Hold on, let me grab my notes. I made notes for this, guys, so I'm really proud of this. Let's see. All right. So Frances Thompson was a Black trans woman who testified in a congressional hearing after she was raped by local police and white supremacists during the Memphis riots. She was one of the 5 women who chose to testify in front of Congress and their assailants. So their assailants are sitting right there. For these 6 women, their assailants are right there. And this is definitely revolutionary during this time because they're testifying to the U.S. Attorney's Office and all these U.S. congressmen at the time and saying what happened to them during this riot that basically was white men assaulting women and men in the streets of Memphis. And they're testifying and saying these things happened to me right in front of the people that assaulted them, as well as U.S. congressmen and women. And this was a super duper big deal because a lot of the times these people expected these people to just take this abuse. And they expected these people to think that this was normal, and it wasn't. And Frances Thompson stood up for herself. In the book, they describe her as a person who wore women's clothing and presented as a woman and was loud and proud as a Black trans woman in the South. And this is the post-antebellum age. So this is a really big deal to have a trans woman of color not only be out and about and fluid and proud and happy in front of people, but to also testify in front of congressmen and her assailants. That's absolutely incredible. So that was something that happened that Hannah Rosen talked about in the book, these women testifying in front of different congressmen, testifying in front of their assailants, and they won. So they won their case, which is a super duper big deal. Unfortunately, it didn't lead to anything other than symbolic gestures. It didn't lead to any form of reparations. It barely led to these men that assaulted these women being in jail for long periods of times, but it was something that was symbolic and it was a win. And it was crazy back then because you didn't see the odds were really stacked against freed men and freed women in the South. They really were because of laws that made it possible, because of Black codes that came after slavery to basically still enslave and bond these people that were newly emancipated. So that's really cool. Let me go ahead and read another excerpt from the book. Give me a second to find it. All right. This talks more about Frances Thompson, as well as someone named Lucy, okay? So regardless of the reason, these criminals grossly mistreated Lucy and Frances. Both women gave testimony at congressional investigation, and even still, the malefactors were not charged. They weren't, and then they were. This was true not only of the incident, but also of the riot in general. Not a single man was arrested or charged in their part of the violence. Instead, many of the officers that were involved, the ones who perpetuated the violence, were charged, but were then compensated for their injuries sustained in effort to suppress the riot. That's crazy. So yes, they were eventually charged, which is okay, that's symbolic, but they were also compensated. So these police officers that took part in the riot by doing what they do nowadays, by beating people and harming people and making it impossible to have peaceful assemblies. I mean, even here in Jacksonville, we had an event, the police called it a riot and started beating the crap out of people. We see that mirrored in Memphis where this riot was happening and they were part of the rape, they were part of the assailants. They were basically acting as if they were an arm of the white planter elite. And that is absolutely crazy. So these women testifying was a super big deal and definitely something that was very, very exciting back in the day. A lot of people also escaped to Jacksonville. So I'll read this as well. So Jacksonville was a place where freed men and freed women traveled to testify against Klan vigilante violence happening around Florida. So people came to Jacksonville to protest and to talk about the KKK harming and abusing freed people. Here's an excerpt. Although Samuel heard nothing further from him after making this report, it is likely that this meeting led to both Samuel and Hannah being subpoenaed to appear before a federal grand jury. Remember, y'all, this is the post-emancipation, like post-antebellum, still the late 1800s life. So this is not something that is happening in the late 1990s. This is something that is happening only a couple years after slavery, in the same way that Francis Thompson testified. So I'll keep reading. Sorry, this is just really exciting. The family traveled to Jacksonville, where they remained for 2 weeks and testified twice in federal court before speaking before the congressional committee, holding hearings in the city at the same time. Sadly, it is unlikely that for all their efforts, the Tutsons were ever able to safely return to Clay County. So if you are familiar with Jacksonville and the surrounding areas, we have Duval County, Clay County, Baker County, and Nassau County. Clay County is a super racist county even now today. A lot of the violence that was happening, according to Hannah Rosin, was happening in Duval County, of course, but mostly in Clay County, where people that were freed men and freed women were literally being strung up into trees, being harmed by the KKK, which is still a vigilante organization that seeks to oppress and repress people's movements and Black folks here in the South. And I'm sure the KKK exists in other parts of the country as well. But as someone that's from the South, I like to speak, in regards to the South. So people were coming to Jacksonville to testify in front of federal grand juries. Now, unfortunately, nothing ever came from those testimonies, and these members of the KKK were never thoroughly punished, in my opinion, thoroughly punished for their crimes or their actions and violence against Black folks in the South, and specifically in Florida in general. But it was still a very exciting time that Black folks, especially the Tutsons, which is the family that Hannah Rosin covered and was talking about, it was exciting because they're testifying in front of a federal grand jury. They get to tell their side of the story. And too many times we hear in the post-antebellum South, and even now today, in our era today, that not a lot of Black people get to tell their side of the story when it comes to vigilanteism. I mean, we see in Tallahassee how a man decided to almost run through protesters, how a man decided to pull out a gun. And the Black folks that were there, the people that were there protesting for Black Lives Matter, they never, ever got to tell their side of the story, and the man was not charged, which is something that is very messed up and very scary. But it also mirrors to the post-antebellum South around the time of Jim Crow and Black codes and so on and so forth. These people are testifying in front of a federal grand jury, but nothing is being done about it. And that's honestly really sad. All right. So again, I told y'all that we were going to be talking about gendered terms as well. So in Hannah Rosin's book, Terror in the Heart of Freedom, she also talks about Black people participating in the political process. She also talked about Black people going around and registering other Black people to vote, going on former plantations where Black people were now sharecroppers, which honestly is another form of slavery. It's messed up. I apologize if you hear my dogs acting crazy in the background. They're very wild. But as I was saying, so talked about Black people participating in the political process. So these people were going around registering Black people to vote. This is a really big deal. It doesn't seem like a big deal in today's language and in today's forms, but this is a really big deal because this is something that was never happening before. And unfortunately, a lot of people were being lynched and murdered by the same KKK that the Tutsons and other Black families testified against in front of a grand jury here in Jacksonville. But they used terms like rape. The white elite class looked at Black people voting as rape. And they use that term, oh, well, if they go vote, that's like rape. They're stealing the virtue of white manhood. They're stealing the virtue of our daughters. If these Black people participate in the political process, then they are basically raping us of our virtue. They would also use gender terms like womanhood. These Black people, if they go and vote, specifically Black men, if they go and vote, they're going to be raping our daughters of their womanhood and of their virtue, and we can't allow them to do that. And that was honestly something that was messed up because that gendered language prevented, and it was very popular. That gendered language started being very, very popular, not just amongst the white elite class, but against like white workers as well. And we're going to get into how the white wealthy planter elite essentially used terms like that to turn white working class people against freedmen and freed women. So they use these gender terms to basically use propaganda to prevent Black people from voting and participating in this political process, which was revolutionary at the time, because again, this is post-emancipation, this is in the post-antebellum South, where Black codes and so on and so forth started to pop up. So let's talk about these terms and how this propaganda really got to the white working class. So the white working class and freedmen started to basically come together and see that they were both being exploited in different ways, of course, but the exploitation was still happening to the both of them. So they started banding together and creating unions. Which is a really big deal. That's just so exciting to me. Like, honestly, like it reminds me of Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, but I will not fangirl over that. But that was exciting to me reading that book of how these Black people, these Black workers and these white workers were forming unions. And the white planter elite did not like that at all whatsoever. So I'll read this analysis that I had. So Terror in the Heart of Freedom is a really good book that examines how wealthy planter elite used the concept of race to get poor exploited white workers to screw over slaves and freedmen. They had a hard time aligning with exploited white workers because of the class distinction. So they couldn't align with white workers because they weren't, oh my goodness, they're really out there killing each other. Like, seriously, I hope that everything's okay. I'm just gonna assume everything's okay, but I will find out in a couple minutes. Anyway, so they couldn't align with them on a class basis. They just couldn't. So they needed a different way and a new way to basically find a way to align. So what they did was they aligned by race, because there wasn't always this thing. Of course, white nationalism and white supremacy is the default for a lot of people, but it wasn't, I don't know how to really explain this without it sounding controversial. Back in the post-emancipation South, I mean, it's very plain and simple. White workers and Black workers were organizing. White workers and Black workers were deciding to unionize different workplaces and work together. It was absolutely crazy. So they had a hard time aligning with exploited white workers because of the class distinction. As a result, they used terms like white man's party to help white working class people that were being exploited feel like they're not being as exploited as they really were, and Negro rule. So they described basically Black people participating in the political process as Negro rule. If we let these Black people vote, and if we let these Black people become lawmakers and congressmen, then that's going to be Negro rule. And we don't want that. We don't want Negro rule, because if Negro rule happens, and this is according to the white planter elite, if Negro rule happens, then the virtue of our sons and the virtue of our daughters specifically is going to be gone. It's not going to exist anymore. So we don't want Negro rule. And that's how they were able to unite with some members of the white working class who were being exploited. They scared them. They used fear-mongering terms and played on their fears to basically divide them. And that is something that, you know, we see even today. Like, we see people that try to divide people based off of race because they have no way to assist people. They have no way to align with people based on class because they're just part of a different class. It is what it is. So yeah. So that is basically an overview of Terror in the Heart of Freedom. I really like the fact that Hannah Rosin mentioned those gender terms and mentioned all of those things. And it really did make me think as well, like, how is that happening today? Is that happening today? Do people assume that Black people participating in the political process would be a loss of virtue, be a loss of womanhood, so on and so forth? But I definitely recommend you read this book. It is a very quick read. It is definitely really cool if you live in Florida because it has a lot of history about Florida and so on and so forth. So I think we had some questions. So what are some books to read after this? Okay, I have my handy dandy bookshelf. So let me look really quickly. Oh yeah, definitely Slavery by Another Name. So Slavery by Another Name by Douglas Blackman was really good because it basically talked about convict leasing. Convict leasing was a really fucked up thing. Sorry, don't mean to cuss, but convict leasing was a really messed up thing in which they would sell Black people that were convicted of crimes. And some of the crimes were very petty crimes as well. For example, like stealing a slice of pizza, things that were not proven. Some people were even taken up for no reason and they were sold for like $8 and they had to work years and years and years and years to pay off their debt. And a lot of people died because they were mining. So they were going into these mines and mining different things and dying from different cancers and health issues. So that is what to read after that. So Slavery by Another Name, because it will teach you about the post-antebellum South and how they were able to enslave people once again. And then the next question is, let's see. Do you think that politicians still use gendered language? Oh my God, yes, yes. Like even with the election, like that we saw, oh, we need to save our sons and daughters. We need to, come here. My dogs are in here, hold on. I have to show you guys. I'm gonna show y'all my dogs, hold on. Come here. Come here. Come on. Okay. All right, sorry. Anytime I have a chance to show off my dogs, I do. All right, this is my dog, Marlo. He's very friendly. So yeah, so okay, we're talking about something, Marlo. All right, so yes, I do think that people still use gendered language and gendered terms even today. I still think they talk about virtue, like Donald Trump was like, we must save the suburban woman, we must save her and her virtue. And he didn't say that exactly, but he did talk about saving the suburban woman from Biden's America, which would be crime ridden. He did talk about the fact that, oh, your grandparents, your grandma won't be able to call the police, blah, blah, blah. So they definitely still play on those forms of fear and propaganda. So yeah. All right, my dog left. He's not having it. Maybe my other dog will come over here, but who knows? All right, what is some advice on how working class can overcome our racial divisions in order to achieve collective liberation? Read the National Question by FRSO. I always plug that because that is definitely a very good thing to read because it helps you understand oppressed nations and it helps you understand about the strategic alliance and the importance of having a strategic alliance and the importance of the white working class aligning with the oppressed nationalities and working together. But I think it's just like unlearning some of the stuff, especially if you live in the South. Unlearning different racial biases that you were taught as a kid, unlearning different things that were seen as okay, and just also just dedicating your life to collective struggle and dedicating your life to what I've dedicated my life to, which is socialism and freedom in our lifetime for everybody. So just aligning via class, like align as much as you can, because that's what we have in common at the end of the day. We're both being exploited. I may make less than you as a Black woman, but you're also being exploited by your boss. So that's something that we can unite. So unity, struggle, unity. All right, I don't know if we have any more questions. So if we don't have any more questions, that is all I have. Thank y'all so much for coming to my study Sunday. I hope it wasn't too crazy and discombobulated, but please, please, please read the book by Hannah Rosin. It is a really good book. If you do not read that book, Slavery by Another Name is definitely a really good starter book. So I hope you have a wonderful Sunday. Please have a good Sunday and see y'all later.